Thank you all for being here. We brought you all here together to talk about your experiences as Black founders and entrepreneurs, right? We know that there is a lot that goes into that, and there's some challenges that you face. So I'm really excited just to hear a little bit more about you and about some of those things that you've learned along the way. My name is Omar. I will be moderating this discussion, but I really just want to start with y'all. If you could please introduce yourself, just tell us a little bit about your business, your pronoun, how long you've been in business, when you started it, and something that you're excited about talking about today. So let's start with Jill.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Omar. It's great to be here. My name is Jill Johnson, and my pronouns are she, her. I've been in business since 2002. Our organization is actually a nonprofit organization, so I do want to make that distinction versus the other two guests here who are for-profit, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I started the organization with my father in 2002.
Oh, well.
And our organization, the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership, is all about eradicating the systemic level barriers that exist for entrepreneurs from historically excluded populations and being able to access the knowledge networks and capital that enable wealth creation through entrepreneurship to even be possible.
Thank you. Joseph?
Thanks for having me. I'm Joseph Ifiegbu. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of eqtble. eqtble is a HR analytics company. We help organizations understand their people through data. And we were part of YC in 2021 and built the company since then. So excited to be here and chat with all you.
Cool. Denise.
Awesome. Really excited to be here as well. Denise Umubyeyi, and the co-founder and COO of 5 to 9. We're an events management software for internal company events. So think your employee resource groups programs, your manager trainings, all hands. We created 5 to 9 because we saw a distinct space where all these organizers were managing all their events and programs on Excel, Slack, email. If you've ever put together for any event, it's just a messy process. So what we did was centralize all of that in one software. Then we plug into their currently existing tools. And then the great thing is we're collecting all this data where we're then able to connect this data to things like retention, promotion within the organization, which is really exciting for employee resource group leaders and workplace leaders and employee experience leaders. I'm excited about this conversation because for me as a founder, at the time that we raised, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, we were like one of 34 Black women that had been invested in. And so when we're thinking about seeing hundreds of us out there, it really starts with other people who are in this space, listening to other Black founders talk about that process. So I'm really excited to share our journey and hear my fellow founders' journeys, and hopefully other people can learn from it.
For sure. We are very excited as well. So you are all successful entrepreneurs running businesses and nonprofits. Let's take it back though, right? Like let's go to what we might call day zero, right? Before you started your business, you had an idea. There might have been a moment where you were like, hey, there's a problem here that I think I could solve, right? Could you tell us a little bit about just sort of how you decided to start a business when you recognized that problem? And I guess a little bit about what that process looked like. And let's start with you, Denise.
Yeah, for sure. I started my career in executive search. So I was a headhunter. I always make this the joke that I liked people alive. Anyways, old joke. My co-founder, Jasmine, had been working at a company where she was an employee resource group leader. And so we came together because we saw a problem where a lot of employee resource groups are managing their events and programs on the same things I just mentioned, like spreadsheets, Excel sheets, everything, calendar. And so we wanted to solve for the problem because all this work is being done, but not much data around that work is actually being collected. So we wanted to bridge that gap and help employee resource group leaders not only simplify and save their time, but also collect all this data that can then prove the impact of their work. And so that's kind of where we first started our work. And then when we started looking more into organizations, we saw that not only employee resource group programs are being managed, but also employee experience programs like manager trainings, as I mentioned, all hands. And a lot of them were created from the perspective of the creator. So if I am a, say, cisgendered white woman managing events and programs, I'm putting out what I, see or experience. And so for our first interview, we asked someone and we asked them how are your events and programs at your company? And this person was a Senegalese, Black man, Muslim, did not drink, and just felt very disconnected. because a lot of the events and programs that were happening at their organization were drinking. And so he was like, I wish I knew other people who did soccer or all those particular things. So we saw a huge gap in really like, yes, there's this problem of disjointed tools, but there's also this bigger problem of data.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to solve for that problem. And it's been definitely a journey from employee resource group leader, seeing a problem for herself, myself loving the entrepreneur and space and just this problem we were solving for. And then just really learning more about our customers and what they were experiencing got us to where we are today.
Totally. When you recognize that problem, right, that there is the data gap as well as just like the heterogeneous experience, you might say, for different employees, were there any skill sets that you feel like you had, whether it's from your, sort of headhunting days or prior jobs that you were like, hey, this actually would be a really good fit for my skill set? Like, how did you actually decide to go and start that business?
Yeah, for sure. Both my co-founder and I are actually non-technical co-founders. So one of the first things, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about the gaps of being a founder. So my strength really came as an executive search leader. I interfaced with a lot of C-level VP execs. I knew kind of the language of HR and large enterprise organizations. So for me, it just made a really good fit for the sales side of things. Like, how do we first get in front of these companies, share our vision, and ultimately sell our platform to them? So that was where I came from. My co-founder, having been in consulting, she brought that kind of business strategy. We really paired our skill set together and we were able to build this. The tech side of things is a story of its own for non-technical founders, but we figured it out in the end.
Cool.
So that's kind of how that came together.
Cool. Joseph?
That's amazing. So my background is in data science. So worked in data science my whole career. I didn't actually think anything of HR, right? So it wasn't the domain that I felt I was going to go into. And when I started my career, I was like, at some point I'm just going to go into become some sort of like chief data officer in some company. That was what I was kind of aiming for. But somehow, mistakenly, got pulled into HR. At the time, I was looking for a head of HR analytics. I saw the job randomly and I was like, oh, this is very interesting, because I was working in retail at the time on retail analytics. And so I applied for it, got the role, and the role was to build the whole infrastructure for the HR analytics team for the company from scratch. I just took on it. I was part of the job interview. They told me like, you might actually get fired. You want the job? And I was like, yes, I do. But it was great for me because it went from me just building some algorithms in some company to actually building from scratch. I think that's the best thing that ever happened to my career, because I built, the infrastructure from scratch. And at the time, WeWork wasn't a place where there was a lot of tools. They had you're talking about like HR tools, LMSs, ATSs, performance surveys. They had so many. And my job was build a system that can connect to all those different data sources. For sure. And then so we can deliver analytics and make decisions, because we don't actually even know our head count, something as simple as that. Yeah. I think over 2 years building the team, building the infrastructure. I think the first 6 months was just myself, and then brought in first hire, who's now my co-founder, actually. And so we just built the team together and over time. But in building the sort of the infrastructure over those 2 years, the idea came, right? Because we spent something like $2 million in terms of headcount and infrastructure, because I had an 18-person team at some point, right? But we built it. But I started to think, I was like, well, not every company has that money or the time and patience to wait for 2 years to build a very full infrastructure. Is there a way we can build something that is cost effective and pretty quick, that can sit on top of all these different systems to deliver analytics? You shouldn't have to pay $2 million to understand, your headcount growth, your diversity, equity, inclusion metrics. Like, you shouldn't pay that much money. You should be able to get it like that. And that's just what clicked. And then had a conversation with my now co-founder. And we're like, all right, let's just do it. So that was sort of that day zero, I would say.
Love it.
Yeah.
And Joe?
Yeah, so my journey is a little bit different in that I wasn't doing something that then led into founding a product per se. But what I saw was a problem for sure. I started the organization, as I mentioned, with my father. My parents had a newspaper publishing business for 20 years. So I grew up in a household that was a small business household. I grew up working all the time and in that life of an entrepreneur. But I had the opportunity to see what happens when you have difficulty meeting payroll, when you're not able to raise capital. When my parents started their business, they did not write a business plan and go out and start pitching to investors. They took what they had. They again saw a challenge in our community of positive news and stories in this great community, but it was a very diverse community that didn't get a lot of positive news from the regional newspapers. And so they came together and they started their paper. But as I said, that gave me the insights into small business ownership. Now, fast forward, when I graduated from college, I had the good fortune to start at Goldman Sachs in the mergers and acquisitions department in the financial analyst program, right? So completely different world where there was not the type of capital constraint. And I had the opportunity to see people who grew their businesses, sold their businesses, which was where Goldman came in. They were selling these companies and creating tremendous wealth.
Sure.
In all of that, there were no people who looked like me, no women, no people of color. And it started to occur to me, why is that? And why is it that my parents' peers I don't see that sort of thing happening? And after 20 years, my parents decided that they wanted to retire. You know, newspaper publishing is a grind. Weekly newspapers, like physical. This was not digital. And we actually still had the machines that you had to go and print things out and take it to the press. Not even digital yet.
Sounds like that might have been your job.
And so, you know, when they retired, unfortunately, they had not built the business in a way that they could extract the value that they had created over 20 years, and that they were able to extract the value from the tremendous brand that they had created. It was the largest Black newspaper in New Jersey. Wow. And so they shut it down. And again, that was what I saw from their peers. And when you look across Black-owned businesses, many of them don't translate into the next generation. And so my father and I came together when they retired from the newspaper. We came together, brought our experiences together to start the organization to try to change that, to try to really address the barriers that exist at a systemic level that prevented them from creating wealth that would have transferred to other generations, and to address the issues, that we see here when, you talk about it was 34 women of color who had raised over $1 million back in, what was it, 2018? 2018, mm-hmm. Yeah. 34 and $1 million is just no money. So that was how we started the organization, but it was more, I think, out of my desire to solve a problem and to say that this problem exists, but it shouldn't continue to exist. And so, taking my childhood of always questioning everything all the time and putting that to good use to say, you know what, we're going to fix this.
Yeah. And thinking about running a business, right? We know that that's a lot of work and it's going to take a toll on you as humans, right? Like you have to balance making sure that your business is successful and your employees are happy with your own sort of like mental well-being, right? And so, I guess like, how do y'all think about the challenges of finding that right balance in life between making sure that you yourselves are sort of mentally healthy while also managing the demands of running your business on a day-to-day basis?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think I would say it helps that I have co-founders. First and foremost, I've seen some companies that are run by solo founders. I think that's incredibly hard. And from even just because over the last few years building a company with two other people, it was hard, and that's with two people. Imagine just by yourself. I mean, I think there are moments whereby one of us is weak, the other is stronger. We lean on each other and support each other. I think that's one of the first things. I think and again, so for solo founders doing things by themselves is amazing, and kudos. But I feel like that has really helped us. It's tough to manage because you have this sort of idea in your mind and you go through this whole process for it to come to fruition. It's magical. It's incredible, right? And you want to, you do everything in your power to make sure that it succeeds. And so what that means is you're talking about 40 hours, that's a myth, right? 40 hours a week, that's a joke. Like, when last did I do, you know what I mean? Like, that's been years since I've done that. But, you know, you're talking 80-hour weeks because you want this to succeed, because you have your customers in mind, because you want to make sure that, like, you deliver the best product. And then, of course, support your employees as well. So it's often tough to sort of separate that. It's like, you know what, I need to kind of get away for a while. But one thing I've done, I think we're talking about this a bit prior to this conversation, but one thing I try and do is give myself at least like an hour or two every day, or I just take walks. I think something as simple as that.
Sure.
I take walks, or I go place just like there's a game, like a pickup game around. Yeah. I feel like that clears my head not to think. Just that moment of just running just clears my head not to. But I found that, I remember like a few weeks ago whereby I had gone like maybe like a week or two, and I had really done that because it was a very busy week. Yeah. I started to sort of feel like, things were not quite clear. Yeah. So when I just ended up going for a hike, came back, and I just had that sort of clarity. So I think you just find those moments as well. And I also find that maybe hanging out with like family as well in moments that I can, or talking to my mom or grandma or stuff like that. I think that definitely helps from time to time. But it's tough, I would say. It's never an easy thing, but it's just trying to remember to do those things. For sure. I would say it helps.
Do you feel like when you started the business, right, you and your co-founder were really trying to get things off the ground, that was something that you were able to do as much then as you might be now that you're a little bit more established?
When we started, I think at first we were like, because it was a beginning stage, so it wasn't really time for anything. We just worked.
Yeah.
So like I did the fundraising. Right. So we're talking about like full days of just back-to-back calls. Like talking about then at the end of the call, you're looking at the notes, trying to figure out why did someone say no, what happened, like, you're getting like all these no's, like, oh my gosh, right? So there was no time to do like trying to do anything, right? And so we said, hey, like it will get better. And it doesn't really, but we promised ourselves that we, like, if we start to see someone is like just working and they're not taking breaks, like we say, no, you have to take a break. Yeah. I think we have kind of really held on to that. So yeah, and that's helped. That's it. Cool. Yeah.
Denise?
For me, 3 things. My therapist.
Yeah.
I love my therapist. I think that every founder, person, human living in the world we live in today, it's just such an important part of life, especially growing up. Like therapy wasn't something that my family ever like prioritized or thought was important. So it was just something that was stigmatized for a long time. And when I was in college, I remember being just so strained. And at that point, it was just like between like dealing with family, being the perfectionist that I am, and like dealing with schoolwork. It was my first experience with therapy. And I had it for like a stint of 3 months. But I forgot how important those 3 months were to my success in school. And so when I became a founder, I remember just like feeling on top of the world. I was like, okay, I'm working these 80 hours, but it's something I love and I'm not going to burn out. And then one day, the same experience that happened in college came across. And I remember just how necessary and helpful that was. And so one, therapy was the biggest one for me. And then second one, executive coach. Like I recommend you use your company dollars, if you can, to get an executive coach, because what a therapist does is really on the emotional health, mental health, and what a coach does is really amplify you as a human at work. And even better if you're able to find a professional coach or an executive coach who both touches personal and professional, because as founders, our 80 hours go into our family hours, our eating hours, our workout hours, our sleeping hours. In the middle of the night, you wake up, you're like, wait, did I send that contract? Did I? Oh, I did. Okay, go back to sleep. Like, so having an executive coach for me who's able to balance both my personal and professional and be like the meter that I need for, am I overworking? Am I not? If I have conflict with coworkers or I have conflict in any place, they're able to basically help manage that. So the executive coach side of things. Then the last side of things is community, like family and community. Like you touched on family, like that's a definitely amazing one. My family has gotten me through so much as a founder, but also just like being around and hearing other founders and their experiences so that you know that like you are not alone. And the fact that you went through 100 no's and that's fine. You're not a failure because you had 100 no's. That one yes is coming around the corner. That's also been super helpful. Like my founder community, especially even my Black founder community, has been such an important part of like keeping myself sane as a founder. So those are the 3 prescriptions that I give to any founder.
For sure. Just a quick follow-up. So I can imagine that there's probably a lot of founders that don't really even think about bringing on an executive coach, right? Like at what point did you realize that you needed one or wanted one, and how did you actually find one?
So I guess I have a 4th prescription. And the 4th prescription is having, like, they always talk about like a kitchen cabinet, like your mentors, people you trust from all walks of life. So one such person was actually my first ever boss in college when I worked for an after school program. She continued to be my mentor throughout. And then she started coaching. Like she's always coached. So I didn't even know we were in a coaching relationship. Yeah. So some mentors end up being that for you. Sure. And so she started coaching, and I was one of her first clients, and I'd been coaching with her. At that point, I was maybe in my 2nd year of being a founder, and I felt like I knew my strengths and weaknesses, but I was like, maybe it's time to open that box and be a better founder. And so I started working with her. But for people who are thinking about like, when's the right time to bring in an executive coach? Like I say immediately. Like as founders, like we may have a description or thought process of ourselves that may be completely different from the perceptions of the people who work for us or with us. And I just think it's such a blind spot that could sometimes lead to your like business ruin.
Sure.
And so I really appreciated the ability of this particular thing that my coach does, which is like a 360 review. So he has 12 people basically give you a 360 review, and you do the same review, and then you compare what others perceive of you versus what you perceive of yourself. Let's just say over the past 3 years, my results have gotten a little closer, but it was a really, really eye-opening thing to do. And then just the work of being the best possible person that you can be for your business, for yourself, and for your family was the process of executive coaching, basically therapy, community, and mentorship.
For sure.
The four prescription
Very important
pills. Yes.
So I came from a different time when it was just all about work. And being in my parents' business, again, it was work all the time.
Sure.
I had a good childhood, so I don't want to make it seem like, I didn't do fun things as a kid, but it was always work first. When I was in the analyst program, I was the best roommate ever for my roommate in New York because I was paying half of the rent and I was never there. Literally, I was never there. I think I counted 5 times that I was there before it was dark, that I was out of work before it got dark. That's just how it was, and that was the time. I've had to work really, really hard today to pull back from that a bit. And I have 4 children and a husband. So there was a time when I had 4 little kids, and the oldest one was 10, and my husband was traveling, and so I was in the midst of building the organization and all of that. My father and I started the organization together, but he was out of it pretty early, so it was really me. I didn't have a co in a sense. And so I think there's some things that have helped me to get through. It's one, I don't think of things really as sacrifice or I'm giving something up. It's I'm making a decision to do this versus that at the time. And so if I wanted to go to all my sons play sports, and I've been to almost all their games. I go to almost all their games, traveled all over the country, going to sports things. I'm choosing to do that. At the time when I say I might need to pull an all-nighter to get something done, I am choosing to do that at that time so that I can have the time over here. When they were playing baseball, when they weren't up, I might be making a phone call or checking emails or something, because that was how I balanced. And I think kind of this notion of I'm making these sacrifices makes it, again, feel like you're giving something up versus it's a choice. If you want to grow a little bit more slowly, let's say, there's no one that's pushing you that you have to grow faster, grow more slowly, create your business in the way that you feel that is best for your life. And, I think I have had to mature over time to understand that my life is my own life. And so what I feel is success for me is success for me. I went to Harvard, and so graduated from Harvard. There's a lot of pressure. You're always at that, perfectionist. I got to do this and everyone else is doing that. And I think so it's a big thing when, as a founder, you can make the decision for yourself what success means, first of all, your path to success and what your best path to that success is. And then just your framing of the situation. So instead of looking at things like, oh my gosh, there's so much stress, I generally don't feel that way. I generally feel like, okay, there's a lot to do in a little bit of time.
Yeah.
How am I going to get that done? Set the path, and then you just work toward it. And something I read very recently was around framing things, instead of saying I have to, saying I get to. So when it's, oh my gosh, I have to drive my son 40 minutes to school back and forth each way. Not, oh my gosh, I have to. It's, I get to spend 40 minutes with my son driving him back and forth to school. So
It's good.
So much of it is how you frame the situation that helps to alleviate the stress and to bring balance.
For sure. And I think it's really cool hearing that, because I think that there's probably, as a non-founder, right, I feel like, and we're all in the New York area, I feel like that there is always this pressure just to work and really just do nothing but that, right? And I can imagine that it's only 100 times that when you're starting a business. So I think it's really cool to hear that.
Okay, can I add one thing?
Yeah.
For founders too, I think it's important to also not beat yourself up because you love working. There's like, and you love what you do, and it's your business and it's your baby, and it's the thing that you are feeling like, this is going to take me to that next level and possibly create generational wealth. Yeah. So I love what I do. It's okay if you work. And people start feeling guilty about, like, oh, your work-life balance, don't work so much. No, I love what I do. I want to work. I want to do this.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
That's super important, though, because like you said, I think if you love what you do, right, as long as it's not feeling like it's taking an undue strain on you, then it's going to be to the benefit.
I need to take a break. Take a break.
Exactly.
One thing that you had mentioned that was interesting to me around, as a founder, like setting that pace for yourself. I think sometimes when you're a founder and you have all this venture money, you're like, oh my gosh, I got $4 million for those humans who are expecting this $4 million to make pigs fly. Amazing, so it's like one of those things where also, like, for me, what I've found is like balancing and having a great relationship with your investors, so that they can also trust that this person, when they are taking time for themselves, it's self-care time. Rather than playtime, or even playtime is completely okay. But I've also always found that in order to create a balancing relationship, so that you're not an overworked human who's afraid of other people's perception, especially being a Black woman or a Black founder, you also feel that extra pressure to perform and to, create that next unicorn. And
often there is the pressure.
Yes, and there is the pressure.
It's a reality.
And there is the pressure for all of that. And that's why for me, I found having great investors who both check in on you. Like, we have this one investor who always makes sure, for my co-founder during fundraising season, did you eat? Did you drink water? Did you, something so simple. And so making sure even the investors who come around you are investors who are not just rooting for their money, they're also rooting for you as the person who's going to get them that money. And your self-care and your health is as important as that. So finding founders who are aligned with making sure that you are healthy has also been a really important one. And some people don't have that luxury. I'm saying that it's a luxury for everyone. And for those who don't have that luxury, it's saying, I already have your money. So trust me, I'm going to get it to this stage, and you trusting yourself and your ability to call time out when you need time out, basically. And that's been a really important one. But when you said that, I was like, yes, that one, the pressure of investors is such a big one that for a lot of people, they don't breathe because they're feeling chased to that finish line, basically.
Well, for us as a nonprofit, in some ways, I feel like it's even worse, because what happens in nonprofit land is you're given a little sliver of money to change the world in 12 months, oftentimes. And it's, what are all the results that you have produced, again, with a little bit of money, or you apply for this amount and you get this amount and change the world.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it is, hey, we're going to have to change the game plan because the funding changed. So
I started out a not-for-profit. I respect all that you know. Respect.
Yeah. I think something else also going from what you said was, I think not being afraid to ask for help.
yeah.
Right? Because there are going to be moments whereby you're like, I mean, there's always that pressure of, oh, I have to raise all this money, right?
Yes.
But I think being transparent with things and not being afraid to ask for help, but also just knowing like, look, it's a process, right? Because I think, you know, you see kind of historically like, oh, well, for me to get to this next stage, I need to get to this amount of revenue in like 12 months or whatever, so I can go raise the next amount. And it's like not always going to be the case. And so just being able to just like, okay, well, that's not the case in this scenario. I'll ask for help when I need, so it's so important as well. And some of my friends said to me that was very interesting. He said, hey, Joseph, do you think you're a success? Right? I said, no, bro, like, I'm working towards that. I'm far from that.
Yeah.
I'm working towards that. And he challenged that. I just, great friend. He said, no, like, the fact that you had an idea, that was just something in your head. You somehow went through this whole thing, created a company, everything, raised money. You have people are in your company that you're paying, and you built a product that you have customers. If this is where you start,
Right.
you're a success. You did, right? But because I think, you know, sometimes we kind of want, you know, we have this idea of, oh yeah, and I want that, right? I want to get to that, you know, create this generation, all that stuff. But he was just like, you know, you did this thing. And he was like, basically he was just saying not to put that much pressure on myself. That it has to be, it's obviously have that goal. But even as I stand right now, as I've done what I've done, it is a success. And I just appreciated that a lot as well. So I kind of, that definition is really important that you said.
In my household, we always say, enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to follow up on something that you said, Jill, just around sort of the nonprofit, and also touch on something you said, Denise, about just like the luxury of being able to have good investors, right? In nonprofit world, right? It's grants that are, like you said, on very short timelines. And I'm just curious how you feel like you've been able to adapt, like you said, needing to change the game plan and simultaneously not feel that pressure to bow and change the world as you do your best to further your goals.
I would say that has only come from me in probably the last 5 years. That initially, because getting into nonprofit, I didn't know anything about nonprofits. My father and I didn't really know how nonprofits worked. He wasn't on nonprofit boards and just didn't understood how it works. We thought it was just kind of like a for-profit business, but you just don't really kind of have to make money. And you can get grants, right? And you can just get grants. Not understanding how the board structure works, how you go out and have these fundraisers and you need people on your board who can bring money to the table and all of that. So for probably the first 15 years of our existence, actually, we were struggling very much in the same way that many of the small business owners and entrepreneurs and founders that we serve struggle. And again, being asked to do a lot with a little and demonstrate all of this impact, some doors opened. And I will say really it was with COVID because so many small businesses were struggling and large companies wanted to do something with small businesses. So they, you know, we got more notice then. And people said, oh, wow, you're doing this great work. The same work we've been doing for 15 years. But, you know, okay. And, you know, now you're recognizing the need for this, seeing all the news that's happened, et cetera. And then when the brutal murder of George Floyd happened and people saying, oh, we need to support Black entrepreneurs, Black founders, Black organizations, we did become the beneficiary of some of that, right? And we got funding that enabled us to now scale up to the point we have, 21 employees. Our budget is over $3.5 million. And we're at a different level for sure. But again, it took that single event for people to realize the need for the work that we were doing. We've been saying, for 20 years now, this is what is needed. It is systemic. It's not that, founders like these two amazing founders, they need more training. They need to be better, need to learn something more. No, they need an opportunity and they need doors opened and look at what they're doing, right? But most of the founders like them are starting with so few resources that it's tough. So
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question about, I'm just curious about, so you said the first 14, 15 years, and that was like, I mean, like, we're still in like, I'm just, because someone said, if you're creating a successful company, you have to think like 10-year increments. How was that first 14, 15 years for you? Like, just because you're talking about how you have to do so much with so little. How was that on you? Just, how was that like mentally just dealing with the day-to-day just grind of that? Because I've been doing this for 2.5 years. And I have funded, and it's still like, tough. Like, so I'm just wondering, like, how has that been for you for that long period of time?
What I would say is that because I always felt there was such a need, and I'm very, very committed that when my sons want to start a business, and several of them have business ideas now, but when they want to start a business, I don't want them to be having this same conversation about access to capital. Mm-hmm. When you're children, decide they want to start a business, they shouldn't be having that same issue around access to capital. We should not be seeing 34, that we shouldn't even be able to count the number of women of color founders who have raised $1 million. Again, $1 million is just nothing. So I think for me, it has been truly the passion around the mission and being able to see kind of little wins and gains along the way. And to just keep going, to know that we could do it, to know that there are a lot of people who are very committed, but we all just need to come together and figure it out together and keep moving the needle. And then when I hear things like, what you two are sharing, your experiences and the wins and where you are today and where you can go, like that makes me so excited to say like, all right, just a little bit more. You still keep it going.
Yeah, so actually on the topic, right, of little wins, y'all have all gotten far, right, in different ways, right? It's been 21 years, right? 2.5 years, right? A few years in. What are some of the wins, the successes, the milestones, right? Like if you can name 2 milestones, right, that you've looked back on your business that really you feel like signified those steps, right? Those steps of success that your friend might have actually, sort of called out for you. Would love to hear just, like I said, 2 milestones for each of you.
For me, 2 milestones that come to mind are one, because I lead sales at Five tonight, closing our first customer. Closing our first customer, I will always remember that because that's the whole point of what we're building. What we're building is to find someone who's like, yes, I will put my money behind that. And our first customer was not a pilot. It was actually a paid customer. And so the fact that someone signed the dotted line and said, I believe in what you're building. I see its future and I want to build alongside. That's probably one of the best things. Like you build for months, you bring the team together, you go, oh my gosh, we just spent all this time. We convinced all these investors, like, are people going to buy? And just like that was a moment that I'll never forget. And then the second one was when, and this milestone is a happy and, I don't want to call it sad. I want to call it also reminds me of just how much more work we have to do is our fundraise in April last year. Like my company raised $4.25 million with leads including Black Ops, Cleveland Avenue with the former CEO of McDonald's, Salesforce Ventures, our Slack fund. It was really amazing. But what that signified was we had closed right as funding started drying up for a lot of entrepreneurs. And the great thing about that milestone was that one, it added extra cash in our bank and is also 2, allowing us to go through what is a very uncertain times for many founders. But 2, while it was a milestone, right now I look at so many Black and brown founders who are having a hard time fundraising because they didn't catch that wind right before. Yep. And now we're in this place where if you don't have investors who are going to pump more money into you, you're basically having the hardest time possible with fundraising. So, but for us, those were 2 milestones that were just like really a huge part of our movement forward and success.
Love it. And I actually want to add on one piece to that question, which is there a milestone that you foresee, like what's sort of the next milestone that you're excited about or you feel like you're working towards hitting?
They always say the Series A is your graduation round as a company. So having the ability to not only have the revenue, but also build the company that's Series A ready. I think Series A is the graduation round. I think even less founders are raising great Series A rounds with really good valuations. And so having that will be probably the really exciting milestone for any company that's a graduation round.
Yeah, for us was similar to, we raised our seed round. I think, so the process of raising the seed round was interesting. It was like a couple of weeks at the time. This was 2021. But it was the most insane couple of weeks, right? Because I think we spoke to over like 80 investors at the time. And most of them were no's. And I think the longest stretch of no's was like a 3-day period, 2.5-day period. There was like 14 no's in a row. And then you start questioning like yourself, like, oh, I think I suck, kind of. It's like, what's happening, right? Like you have all, so having all this, thoughts and what should I keep doing? Like what's happening? And do people want, like do people want, is this even useful kind of thing? But when we end up hitting that and just, we had that one person say yes. And so we raised $3 million initialized capital, Gary Tan and Jen led that round. But it was just such an amazing conversation. And once it said yes, then everything else just started to fall in place, right? And so that was the first milestone. We're like, okay, I called my co-founders and we were just going crazy. Like it was just incredible, such an incredible feeling. And then the second one that we were like, okay, yes, it was when we released sort of the V2 of our product. We had the V1, we had a lot of good customers, and I would say like the first customer is beautiful too, because we had we had the first customer, and at the time I would say like we also coincided when we raised too, so it was really awesome. For that too, I would say we literally just said we'll do anything for you. Like we just, because it was the first, so we just whatever we had to, and so that was an amazing moment. But when we did the V2 of our product, when you get on like sales calls and every customer that you get on this call, let's say this span of like a few weeks, all having the same exact reaction. Oh, this is dope. Yes, kind of. Yes. Oh, like we were like, oh, there's something here. Like we kind of felt that we had hit on something, and we just wanted to just from there kind of really start to just iterate from there. But I think that was a good feeling. Also, I was getting on those sales calls, and it was the same exact reaction. But like, oh, we've built something here that we can be really proud of. So I would say those are the two milestones. Love that. And then for future, this is the A round. I won that Series A round. Like, I want to be a shining light to show, hey, you can do this. Because I haven't seen a lot of Black founders that have gotten to those levels and raised really good rounds. And so I want to be one of those that do that and also lead the way for more to come. So I think that's a big thing for me, for sure. I trust that both of y'all definitely will. So let's do it. So do it.
And whatever we can do to help facilitate that,
sure.
Happy to help. I would say for me, I have felt so many wins along the way. And every day when an entrepreneur says, oh my gosh, wow, that was so helpful, when they're getting help from one of our community, someone from our community of volunteers. We have close to 1,000 people in our volunteer community. But I would say that getting our first contract with the Department of Labor to do entrepreneurial training way back when we did that, it was like a $300,000 contract or so. We had three people in the organization, and we delivered on that contract really well. It went great and helped so many people who are still in business today. And I will say also, and this is not just because we're here filming this with Justworks, but getting the Justworks grant was actually a big thing for us because it was competitive. Lots of, I've raised over $10 million for this organization over the lifetime, most of that being in the last 5 years. But much of it has been through relationships and through connections, or, getting a contract due to a relationship. Not many of them have been competitive. In fact, we haven't really done well if it's just, thousands and thousands of organizations applying to things, and that hasn't really worked out for us. So when we got this grant, it was a competitive process that we applied, and that felt really good because it felt like we were seen and recognized for the work that we do. And it was a validation that this is really important stuff, that, there is a need for this work. So, so that felt really good. And then when I look at what's next, we think that there's still a void out there in the world of access to capital. Mm-hmm. And we want to raise ourselves or connect with a partner to actually have control of a pool of capital that we can use to help to catalyze amazing founders like these before they get seen and recognized. And, that once you get that first, as you mentioned, once you get that first person, getting the second and third and the fourth becomes so much easier. So we feel like there is a need for that kind of pool of capital to help to catalyze founders to raise money faster.
Definitely. That is a big need. And it actually goes very neatly into sort of the next question, which is really just, you talked about some milestones and some wins, right? But of course, there are going to be challenges that you have all faced along the way, and with founders and especially Black founders, across the country and the world. If y'all wouldn't mind, I would love to hear, I think you've all talked about funding quite a bit. So maybe one for funding and just experience, that funding experience related challenge, and then one non-funding challenge that you can speak to that you've experienced, and maybe some lessons that you've learned from those processes along the way.
Fundraising, I would say I think you talk about access. It's such a big thing. We had an idea. We all 3 technical co-founders. I'll see about your technical thing later as well. But we all 3 technical co-founders, and we built products, right? However, we didn't know anything about that world. Well, I don't come from that. I didn't go to I just good schools, but I don't have any of that access, right? And so for me, I was like, well, I have to figure out a way to give myself an edge here. And so we're like, okay, well, we have to apply to YC, Y Combinator. And so at the time we had like a small contract. We had an alpha product. Like it was really, really early stages, like talking about like Excel sheets levels of product, right? It was very basic. When we applied to Y Combinator, and we were lucky enough when we got in. It wasn't being part of YC that we actually started to get access in terms of, we got introductions to VCs and investors. But to be honest, like if I didn't go through YC, I wouldn't have been able to raise money, because even with going through YC, we still had difficulty. Yeah. Because I have other like friends, like I have an Indian friend. She's great founder. She was raising for like a year, right? Raised only $500,000 of just grime, and she has a good product, good team, but just tough because she didn't go through YC. She doesn't have those networks in, right? And so, I think I had to do that. But even with that, it was still tough because we would go into this fundraising meetings during the time I was fundraising for our seed. And they will ask the most ridiculous question. It's like, have you tried raising from friends and family? Like, you think if my friends and family were balling like that, like I would be really talking to you. Like if I could raise $2 million from my friends and family, I wouldn't talking to you. What are you talking about? I don't know how I have that,
But that's an expectation, often a disqualifier to raise future funding.
And it's ridiculous because that means you're expecting that everyone that's raising should come from a place of like access and money, which most of us do not come from, right? And so I was just like, it was absolutely ridiculous. So we had questions like that came up, and it just like pushbacks in terms of what we do it, even though we had like a lot of pedigree in terms of, I worked at WeWork, I built a team from scratch. I worked at Snapchat, I led the HR analytics, the tech team. Wasn't enough. Even with all the stuff I'd done, I worked at Arsenal FC, the football club, as a data scientist, not enough, right? So even with that, it was still tough, right? But, I'm just so grateful, like, because Gary Tan got into the call with me. He was just like, he didn't ask me anything about it. He just asked me about, like, hey, what inspired you to do? He just like trying to understand me as a person, and tell me my motivations. And he gave me $2.2 million there.
Right.
And then once that happened, oh my God, that was a game changer. That call out, when you say this on the call, I was just like calm. I was like, he didn't even know what was happening. Yeah. Because I'd gotten 14, like I said to you, I had 14 no's in a stretch. Yeah. And then that night, I literally talked to my co-founders. I'm like, we might have to use our savings to jumpstart. Like at that point, I was like, we're going to do it. Yeah. The next morning, I had the call with Gary, and then we got the money. It was such an incredible feeling. But we went through a lot of no's, 80 conversations, mostly no's. And then once he said yes, then it was like, oh, people were like, oh yeah, you can have money now. That's ridiculous, right? But I'm glad that, he said that. So that was the first year of the fundraising side. But I think it's hard, that access. On the second side, I think what people don't talk about enough, you mentioned something along those lines that, we've dealt with. It's a support system outside of fundraising. Like, so having the set of founders and people around, and just the same way, like, you're talking about raising kids, it takes a village to build a company, sort of takes a village as well. I think a lot of times people don't realize that, yes, as founders, we need support outside of like just the communities that you're in. Yeah. And oftentimes there are founders that maybe don't achieve the goals that they set out to achieve because they didn't have the right support system. It's such an important thing. And so I'm glad that, we get to have community like this and other founders that have been, that I was able to kind of get connected to and things like that. And I think that's been very helpful because, otherwise, like, again, I didn't know founders. I just knew how to build the product and I just started building it. And a lot of founders that didn't go through, let's say, a YC or incubator don't have that community. So my friend was complaining, like, I don't know who else to talk to. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm here now. So I connected her to other founders, but she didn't have that because she didn't go through this whole thing. And you have a lot of founders like that that are really great, but they don't know. Like, oh, well, I'm going through this one thing. Hey, have you gone through that before? Oh yeah, I sold to this company. This is how you should do it.
Exactly.
Like, we need more.
Already, we were having conversations about how to get through HR.
Yeah, exactly, right.
We're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But imagine how much innovation's lost.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, because these folks can't get funding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that you say that because I think that there is this perception of founders a lot of the time where they're just in sort of these individual forces, right? They have this idea, they drive it forward, right? Work through the funding process. And I think you're right. It's not always talked about enough that there's such a community that helps make that happen. That is really integral to make that happen.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned around Gary Tan, and for us, one of the hardest things in fundraising was also the same thing, where different fundraising networks, so say the Midwest, the East Coast, Silicon Valley, or the Bay Area, they all have their own valuations for the same company. They all have their own understanding of what you should be, what you should look like, how much you should get for what valuation. And so when we first started fundraising, we started our fundraising in the Midwest, which is now catching up. I think the tech ecosystem in Chicago is growing, and which is amazing for it. One of our investors and longtime support person, same person who asked my co-founder when she's fundraising, did you have water today? Basically said, that's ridiculous. We had gotten this valuation that was just ridiculous for where we were and for where our revenue was. And this particular investor said, I'm going to put in the first check. I'm not a lead, but I'll put in the first check and I'm putting it at this valuation, which is an amazing valuation for us at that point. And that kind of like started the conversations with all the other investors and put our valuation at that level. And so having us, I know you kind of mentioned like the negatives, but that was like the negative that also led to the win, was having the investors that are going to go to bat for you so that you are a successful company is just such an important one, because as soon as that one person who's well-respected says yes, everyone else sees that as a signal for moving forward, which is sad because that shouldn't be the case, and which is sad because most of us don't have friends and family who can fill up a $1 million round so that we can get our product off the line. And to the point you were just saying, developers are super expensive. So congrats on having a technical team. So developers pay for developers, all of that is super expensive. So that was one of the biggest challenges on the fundraising side. And then on the technical side, being non-technical co-founders, it just becomes even more important to be such a product-driven team and also find tech talent that really aligns with the direction that we were going in. So those were probably the two really tough parts for our beginning, but we've 5 years in, 2018 to now, I think we've kind of gotten the hang of it, but it's still hard. Team side of things is a hard one.
So follow up, I guess, specifically for your business also. I know that a lot of times historically, right, you think about like the sort of developers and engineering talent, right? It has been more difficult to find diverse talent in that pool. And again, especially since you actually have a DEIB product, right?
Yeah.
How challenging did you find that to sort of find the right people to help you build your business?
Yeah, I would say on the developer side of things, quite challenging in the beginning. And for us, what we really started leaning on was having a really solid interview process that vetted for individuals who were aligned with our mission, which is basically to create workplaces where everyone belongs.
Sure.
And so in our the same investor we love, Ash for Sterling Road is amazing. Ash, one of his biggest things was like, if it takes you, don't rush to find a person just because you need someone immediately. Like that, you can make mistakes in the rushing process. Like make sure that if it takes you 2 months, 3 months to find that right technical leader for your organization, that's the time that you're taking. And so being super thorough and being patient was an important one, because a bad hire is, especially technical debt and many other things that you then have to clean up for. And currently our head of engineering has been a really amazing blessing to our team. So it's been great.
So this has been a great conversation, y'all. I appreciate it. It's been very real. And I want to wrap things up by taking it back to the beginning. So if y'all could think back and just think about what is something that you wish you had known at the time that you started your business, I would love to just hear a little bit about that, and just any kind of advice you might have for founders who are getting off the ground as of right now.
I think what I'll say is go back to the part about the authenticity. Although I think that it was a process for me to get there.
Sure.
I think that I got there because of everything that I went through over
Definitely.
15 years with the organization, and seeing the ins and outs and really hearing the stories of the entrepreneurs and founders. Like, wait, but he did this work before and she did that before and she still isn't able to get funding. Actually being able to go through that journey to get to the aha moment, like, wait a second, let's actually really focus on the real problem. And I think also then being able to connect with people around the problem in a way that they're able to hear it, because I think that's equally important. And one of the reasons that we're even having this conversation is around helping people to understand the backstory, the history of why founders like these are not able to get capital and have access to resources in the way that people from resource-rich communities are. That didn't happen. I don't think I would have been there in the beginning. So I think that was a process. And so I would say that my message to people starting out would be to enjoy the process, like live in the process, and that's a big part of it. It's not just what you think that success is out here, but live in the process. Be willing and ready to pivot, and really think about what your authenticity is, and lean into that and connect with the people who feel the same way.
Yeah. No escaping.
I know I'm not escaping this time. I think for me, what I wish I had known back then, and just speaking for myself alone as a founder, is that I am enough. I think that for like just a little bit of a history, like for me, I was born in Rwanda, and after 94, I've had to move to a different environment where there was different languages that were being spoken, different people every few years, until I came to the US in 2005. Where again, I had to learn this completely new environment. And I would equate becoming a founder and going from corporate world to the VC tech ecosystem similarly, like cash burn, give me whatever other, CAC to LTV ratio. Like it was a completely different language, different humans who didn't look like me. Like it was a completely different world. And if I had just taken the same lessons that I had, like moving from country to country, and where like I would enter a new ecosystem, yes, with all its challenges, I was so stubbornly myself. And when I first started out in VC, it was just such a completely different world that was a little cliquey, and I mean like little kind of, very cliquey, people who don't look like you. And if I had known just like back then that I am completely enough, it is okay for me to walk into a room, hear CAC to LTV ratio and go, could someone explain, or just be like, real quick, it's okay. Because literally every single person, everyone else is making it up as they go.
Right.
Like every single person is making it up as they go.
Definitely.
They're just looking like they got it together. And that's what I would tell myself when I started out in this journey, for sure.
Yeah.
You are enough. You are.
Yeah. It's like fake it till you make it, but you actually are. Just be
Completely.
you and you make it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think for me, there's this thing I learned, I think to one of my mentors years ago. And he said, well, you could have a good product and you don't have good sort of marketing around it. And that happens, even if you have the best product, you will sell, you will grow. You can have a good market and not a good product, and you will sell a lot. Eventually, people will start. You have a lot of churn.
Okay.
So it's like the best thing to do is to have obviously the product, right? And it's fantastic. What we didn't do on time, because we are product people, we know how to build, so we just built.
Yeah.
And then the marketing, the go-to-market, we just started to do it later, way later.
Mm-hmm.
And that really delayed, we could have just even grown faster. Like there's so many things we could have, obviously, like we're growing and we're grateful for the journey. But we didn't learn till after that, oh my gosh, we should have, knowing what I know now, I will start selling the product before I even build it.
Yeah.
Because that's what we see people do. Like, wait, so you're selling, what's the product? Man, it's not built.
But it's gonna be beautiful.
It's gonna, yeah. So I would say that would be one of the biggest things. I really go back to similar to what you said, just enjoying the journey and the process, because we know this thing now because we went through it. I wouldn't have known it
For sure.
And even if when someone told Joseph do it this way, I would have been like, nah, what he said. So I had to have gone through it for me to
Definitely.
get to this software.
On the sales and go-to-marketing side of things, if you feel it, do you feel like that is a motion that you can learn, that anyone can learn? Or if you're thinking about it early on and maybe you're more product or technical oriented, it might make sense to look for the community and sort of partner maybe with a co-founder who's going to be, sort of have that strength more so than you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's if you're a more technical person, right, you can build all the stuff, then your co-founder, ideally, they should complement. Like I love my two co-founders, and we work so great together. We're all technical. None of us are actually good at sales. Yeah. Like, I do the sales now. What do I know? I've never thought I would be doing sales, but I've had to learn. But we had, through our network and through like YC and Initialize and Gary, and we found like some really good, amazing like sales leaders that they get on the call with us and say, wait, you're charging how much for that? And you went and did what there? No, that doesn't work, kind of thing. So they challenge us and say, okay, no, here's read this or look at this, or come back to me with this. Let's see how it's going. So I think the community has been helpful. So definitely either have a community if you don't have the skill set, or if you can have a co-founder that can join that has that skill set. And that's kind of the recipe for success, I would say.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
So what I heard years ago was that if you don't look back and hate and cringe at the first product that you put out, that you got out too late.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like it should be a situation where you're like, oh my God, that was horrible, but we got out there.
Yeah. And another thing on the co-founder side of things is like there are also plenty of amazing founders who also have don't have co-founders, but have really hired around them an interesting team. Like I'm thinking about currently one of my friends who's the co-founder of The Folklore. She's a Black founder, solo founder, and for her, she's like, I just operate best as a solo founder. It's like, I've tried it. It does not work for me. And like knowing yourself too. And like, what for me, I'm a team person. I love working with co-founders. And so that's like an important thing. But for some founders, like they're like, I'm a solo founder and that's who I am. Yeah. And they teach themselves everything or hire a team around them to do that. But no shade too to the solo founders. I know it's not no shade. I'm just adding for anyone who would be listening that being a solo founder or a co-founder, it's really about knowing who you are and yourself in order to do that. But yeah,
making sure you add your board potentially as part of that community.
Yeah.
Nonprofit, as I am, or for-profit, having that board. There's an issue that I need to think through. I sent a text to my board chair this morning saying, "Hey, do you have some time to talk this week?" Yeah. Like just talking things through makes all the difference.
Like I said, this has been an incredible conversation. I just want to thank each of you. Jill, Joseph, Denise, it's just great hearing all of your experience and all the wisdom that y'all have to share. And you're clearly all still learning, and that's also very cool to see. We'll hopefully just be able to continue to build this community and do big things, and make it easier for Black founders to reach where y'all are and even beyond. Thank you all again.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, sure.
Of course.
This has been amazing.
Yeah.